be used to create depth, right? It's something we've been talking about in our drawing classes as well, the whole idea that we're drawing on a flat paper, but we want it to appear that we're creating space. It's this illusion. So these are some things that are actually, I think, just helpful in general, and may be helpful for some of our drawing classes as well to consider these things. So just laws of perspective, the whole idea is these are techniques that you can use in your drawing and painting to create depth. So the first thing is the size law. And this whole idea that things that are closer to us appear bigger because we're closer to them, right? And things that are further away get smaller. So you can see a couple examples here with the landscape with the rocks. I kind of explained, like, if you were to walk around to the other side, those rocks wouldn't actually be smaller, right? It's, of course, where we're standing. So it's thinking about that. How can we translate that into art? And that's by making things appear bigger if they're close and drawing them smaller if they're further away. And then you can see the example with the grapes. The grapes in the back are a little blurry, kind of blurred out, but same idea. They appear smaller even though they're probably about the same size. Right, then a surface law, thinking about this idea of farther away objects tend to be higher up on the page, and closer to us objects tend to be lower on the page. And it's this whole idea of perspective, that if you were walking along that dock, those posts are about the same size, give or take. As you're walking along, they would then appear that way. But again, we're trying to show an image or a scene, and we want to show depth. So translating that into high and low, as far and close, can help us achieve that. And then overlapping, thinking about how things that are close to us appear in front of things that are further away. So we've got overlapping here. And, as you're drawing, we've even talked about this in our still life, thinking about what's in front versus what's in back, and how do we overlap and kind of create those shapes on top of each other. And then the density law, thinking about how close objects tend to have more detail. They tend to have sharper edges, crisp, whereas as things go back, they tend to blur out a little bit. And if you're nearsighted like me and you're not wearing your glasses or your contacts, you can create that effect for yourself when you're looking at an object and then everything in the back goes blurry. But photography, often we intensify that. We like to see crisp main subjects and blurred backgrounds. So that's something we can push in our paintings and drawings by creating things kind of blurry or making them smudgy. Foreshortening, and I was thinking about doing an entire class on foreshortening, because that's like a whole thing. Foreshortening, to kind of master that idea. But simply put, foreshortening is this idea that as objects go back in space, they start to converge and come together. And like if you were to take your fingers and sort of trace them along the fence and move them back to the right, eventually, even if you let your fingers trail off into the white of the background, that point would meet. We'd meet a point, like perspective. But then as you come closer, that starts to open up. Okay, so foreshortening is something to consider. It's not always something you're going to have in art or a landscape, but it's something you could have if you've got, like a fence or a pathway or something kind of running along the side in this type of fashion. Right, and then atmospheric perspective is kind of like a little crash course. And, of course, you probably already know about this, but it's this whole idea of the atmosphere and how that impacts changes in values, contrast, and color. So if you look at this image here, about halfway through that mid-range, we start to almost see it kind of start to fade into the blue. It starts to take on the atmosphere as it goes back into space. Like living where I live with the Rockies, on a clear day, this is very evident because I can start to see them, going back in space, and the further away they get, they start to kind of take on the sky. And I'll show you an example of all of these things. So this is what I mean by changing contrast. So close objects tend to have higher contrast versus farther away objects have lower contrast because again, they're starting to blend into the sky. And then changing color sample. Typically speaking, closer objects tend to be warmer and further away objects tend to be cooler. Now, I always like to stress that that doesn't mean, you know, your classic reds, oranges, yellows. It doesn't mean you have to choose those for your close colors and, you know, traditionally cool colors for the back, even though this is similar to that in a sense. But think about like, okay, green, maybe it's more yellowy green for closer up, and then maybe it's more blue green as it starts to go back, like in this case. So it's kind of, and again, you know, I know some of you have that little color wheel. That's where this comes into play because you can look at those warms and cools of every variation. You know, like an Alzarian crimson is going to be a warm red, but like a cadmium red is going to be a cool red, and that's going to help push things back. And this is what I mean by change in value. If you look at the shadows, okay, specifically shadows, of course, we've got some brighter greens. It's not that you can't have bright colors up front, but if you look at the shadows and we see darker values up front, and then as things push back, the values actually start to lighten because again, they're taking on that haze, the effect of the atmosphere. And you know, atmospheric perspective is present in any kind of environment, even underwater, at night, cityscape, mountainscape, oceanscape, you can see these things happening. And this is just an example of a reverse color perspective. And the whole idea here, this comes into play like when something is being backlit or the sun is setting. Think of like a silhouette picture. You know, if someone is like dancing in front of the sunset and they're sort of blacked out, that's the effect that this creates. Because of course, with every rule of art, there's something you can break or change. So I wanted to show you that in this instance, the rocks here are cool, the midsection here is warm, and then cool again at the top. So you can flip things and change things, but of course, you know, I just always like to say kind of the general rules, and then here's like a variation of it. Cool, well, there we go. That was just my little overview. So I'm going to really quick just grab this link while I've got it open, and then there we go. Okay, so in the chat, here is that little presentation. Cool. So I'm going to turn on my camera. There we go. And then just kind of so I know who's planning on painting along today versus watching. Okay, Cheryl's gonna paint, Cindy's gonna paint, Susan, okay, Lee, and I know Carol and we chatted and she's kind of watching to check out some of the painting. Cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch my camera here. And Cindy, I posted, so if you click in the chat and open up a chat, there is a link to a little presentation on just some of the like general kind of rules of perspective, like how things in front we draw bigger, and as things go back, they get smaller. So it's just kind of like a little guide for you guys, just a resource.
Do we need a big or a small paper?
Great question. So what I was going to tell you is I happen to have this sketchbook, but I've been teaching my students how to do minis. We've been doing like little 4x6s. So here's my thought is I'm going to take some washi tape and I'm going to make 2 little ones so I can work 2 at once. Because sometimes that's kind of nice with watercolor when we're waiting for things to dry. And then also my thought was,
Washi tape.
I can show you some different things then. So I'm just going to take some washi tape and yeah, make a little grid.
Okay, I can't find my washi tape, so I'm going to use little paper.
Okay, that works too. Yeah, actually, that's what we were doing in my classroom. We're all using just little, I was cutting these little cute pieces of paper. They look like little postcards. They're really darling. And we had this idea to print them all in a one big strip and hang them on the wall like a running horizon line.
Yeah.
Because they're all these cute little landscapes. So, oops. Dropping stuff. All right, so my thought is I'm going to kind of just teach you the process with kind of a relatively little simple landscape, but you can obviously jazz it up as much as you want. I do happen to have like some salt here just because salt is fun for texture, but it's not something you have to have. I also happen to have some masking fluid here for blacking out my whites, but I'll kind of talk about some other strategies for that if you don't have masking fluid. You can use actually just washi tape to mask with, or you can use masking tape, you can use rubber cement glue, or you can just avoid areas and just not paint them to keep them white. It's just, you know, I've talked about this in some of our intro watercolor classes, but traditional watercolor, you save the white of your paper. Watercolor is that one medium where watercolor paper is really the one thing it works on. It doesn't work so well on other papers. So we want to preserve the white, but then keep in mind if you choose to add white paint, that's another option if you want to get some more pastel colors, or if you wanted, you know, just add a different type of painting style into it. It's a little bit more contemporary. I have here, this is just some Winsor Newton tube watercolor. I actually squeezed, or actually no, this is my koi watercolor actually. But I squeezed all these out and let them dry a while back. But I can just kind of reactivate them, but pans work as well. And then the other thing you're gonna need is a pencil. And if you have like a 2H on hand, that's really handy because it's nice to keep this really super light. I always keep my watercolor drawings very, very light. And then I have an eraser too. All right, so thinking about kind of a simple little landscape. Now, of course, we can reference images, but we're not today. We're just gonna kind of talk about process, but then maybe that's fun, you know, to do too if you want, but I'll just kind of start. And my kind of idea is I like to think about a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, okay? So I think just to keep it nice and simple, I'm gonna start with a middle ground and just put some kind of loose mountain shapes. And hopefully you can see this. I'm trying to keep it relatively light, but I know it's tricky to see. Let's see. I'll maybe draw just a little darker than I normally would so everyone can see this. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And then I'm just gonna kind of overlap some mountains just through the mid-range. I could put some kind of going back if I want to. Maybe just a few, you know, whatever you want this to look like. My style here is definitely not going to be hyper realistic by any means. It's going to be just a little bit more expressive, but you could definitely go either way, stylize it more or make it more realistic, but the process is the same. And then I think, you know, maybe I want like a little kind of closer uphill that's going to maybe start my foreground. You know, I could expand these down if I wanted to. Just think about how could I kind of divide up that space a little bit. All right, then I want something really up close in the foreground. So I'm going to actually put like, I'm thinking like an aspen tree, like right through here. So I'm gonna just start by drawing the trunk. And this is, imagine like really close to me. So it's cropped. I'm not seeing the bottom of it and I'm not seeing the top of it. I'm just seeing the trunk. So then I'm just gonna erase these little lines that intersect because I'm not gonna see the mountain go through the tree there. And you know, if I wanted to, I could maybe add in like a little branch. It's kind of going off. But a lot of times aspen trees are, you know, they're tall or maybe it's like a birch tree or something like that. So I'm gonna leave this predominantly white. That way I can kind of have something that I'm masking. And then I'll kind of add some detail to that later. All right, and then, okay, if I've got maybe one tree here, maybe I want like another tree here, but it's back a little further. So this one, I am going to see the bottom of it. So just, I'm gonna draw some like little kind of roots. Just kind of, you know, and then same kind of deal. I'm gonna have this go all the way up. And then I'll erase what's inside. All right, so now I've got like, you know, a tree kind of going back a little bit. I'm seeing the roots there. Maybe I could also have a little branch coming out if I wanted to. All right, and really for a sketch, cool, that looks good to me. I mean, the rest I'm going to do with the paint. Okay, my watercolor sketches are usually pretty simple. I don't add much else because the watercolor is going to do the rest of what I need it to. So after you are finished with your sketch, and feel free, of course, if you want to do something different than what I'm doing, add whatever you want. That's the fun part. I'm just kind of keeping it simple to, again, show you this process. So after you have your sketch done, think about what do you want to be white? So you have to think ahead a little bit. But for example, maybe your mountains are snow-capped. Maybe you have some puffy clouds in the sky. Maybe it's at night and you have some stars. Or maybe it's a sunset and you want to save the white of the paper so you can put some pure yellow in at the end. Or maybe, like I said, these are birch or aspen trees and you want to preserve some of the white. So you do have to think ahead a little bit with watercolor. It's a little different because you're not putting those highlights on top. So you can use masking fluid, like I said. I can, you know, I'll even just show you what I've done with washi tape before. You know, washi tape is great for masking too because it just peels off really easily. But like for your trees, I can even just take washi tape, oops, and use it to mask out this white. You know, I can cut it. And of course, you can always avoid, I mean, just not paint around it. But if that's hard for you to do, that's why this stuff comes in handy, especially like the masking fluid. I definitely recommend, like, if you are really enjoying watercolor and you don't have any to pick some up. I just got mine from Michael's, used a coupon. I think it was about like $6 or something. So it's definitely worth it, lasts you a while. But I'm just going to trim this washi tape just to show you some different ways to do things. And again, this washi tape is really nice. I think I just, you know, get some rolls from Target and I think I tried some like a cheap brand from Amazon, and I feel like there's just hardly anything on the roll, but the Scotch stuff is really nice. But I have to try some other brands. But yeah, I just bought some from Amazon and I wasn't super impressed with how much was on there. All right, so got this mask. I know it looks funny because it's all in the pattern, but we'll get to pop that off later. And then just for a little variety, let's see. I'll do just a little maybe snow on the top of my mountains. I'm just gonna use a little masking fluid for this, but you could easily paint around this too. Or cut some tape up, or just give it a little. And the masking fluid, once it dries, it's like the last thing you'll peel off, but it just kind of rolls up. And your white is saved. You know, I could easily, you know, maybe add a little bit for some clouds in the sky. The nice thing too, it's like after you bring the white back, you can always add some tints or some kind of bring some edges of washes into it or something. So there's some fun things you can do. Top. Cool, that looks good. And then I'll just avoid this tree. So that way I'm doing one with tape, some masking, and some avoiding. That way I'm showing you all three techniques in one painting. See, I'll zoom in a little bit. All right, so the first thing you want to do, and I of course have to let my masking fluid dry a little bit, but that's okay. First thing you're going to want to do is think about your sky. So your background, essentially. What do you want that to look like? And that's the first thing you should paint. Then we'll work our way to kind of our middle ground and then everything that's closest to us. And keep in mind that we want to think about kind of warming what's close and kind of cooling what's further away, just for this practice piece, unless you want to, you know, break the rules, which you absolutely can. And then I like to think about details last. So like finishing touches, like the little eyes, you know, on the tree, maybe with some black. Or actually this is a great opportunity to bring in like some watercolor pencils too. I love adding watercolor pencils for details because, you know, you get those little crisp lines. So we'll kind of talk about that too. So while this is drying, I'm just going to start kind of getting some color ready. Now, watercolor is going to work best in layers. You're going to want to build it up over time. So keep in mind, your initial color doesn't need to be exact right away. So I'm just going to start pulling some of my blue out. I actually think I only have one blue. I might have to do some mixing. Oops. That's the blue. Oh, that's my black. I'm gonna grab, got another little thing of watercolor over here. I just want couple more options for my blue. So I'm just gonna kind of, like I said, get my color ready. I'm gonna kind of keep mine fairly classic with colors for the demonstration tonight. Just because I think, you know, sometimes starting out simple is a good way to learn it. And then it's nice to change it up after that. So mixing quite a bit of water with this initial layer here, or first wash. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and start bringing in a light wash of blue into my sky. And again, you could certainly make this any color that you wanted. It could be night, it could be sunset. And again, I'm trying to avoid this tree, so I'm just gonna kind of paint around it. And I have a little round, I'm using just some rounds and some little flats for my brushes, keeping it super simple. Sometimes I think that's nice when you're starting with watercolor, but of course use anything you want. But those are two good brushes, I think, for watercolor. And I'm just adding, making sure there's lots of water mixed in here. I want this to be very washy. And if you accidentally get color somewhere where you don't want it, usually if you work relatively quickly, like with a paper towel, you can blot it up and lift. And the other thing too is, just keep in mind, sometimes it's nice to have, areas kind of blend and maybe kind of drop some different colors and let them like a wet on wet style. And then sometimes it's nice to have crisp edges and let things dry. So just kind of think about, some of the quality of the paint, how it's interacting. And of course, my clouds look a little funny right now because they've got the masking fluid on them, but we'll take that off later. I'm just gonna drop in, now I've got that initial wash done, just some kind of darker blues in here. Just want a little bit of a variety. Again, I'm just kind of tapping it in because I want a little wet on wet style. I want it to kind of be a little bit organic. It's like I think of all the different skies, like sometimes it's like it feels like it's one solid kind of blue or color, and then it's like other times it feels like it's all these different things. So it's like I think anything you want to do goes. And then, it's always, as always, you can leave the sky, let it dry for a little bit, then come back to it if you want to. Cool. So then think about kind of your middle ground. And well, let me phrase it this way. If you feel more comfortable, you could certainly start to put in like this part of the foreground and then work your way back, or you could kind of work this scale like the mountain range and come forward. I mean, really, that's up to you. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. So maybe we'll start up front and work our way back, because then we can kind of like work warm and then we'll kind of cool it as we go back. Because we're just going to keep it, like I said, kind of classic, but if you want to do your own thing, you absolutely can. So I'm going to start pulling some green and then like yellow ochre or like a mustardy kind of yellow color tends to be warmer than like a lemon yellow color. So that can be a good way to warm a green if you want to go a green color. And initially, I'm just applying some washes here. I'm not gonna do like a ton of detailing at this point. I'm just gonna kind of get this initial wash in here. Let's see. And again, it doesn't have to be the perfect color right away. This is maybe a nice kind of start. And I'm mixing lots of water in with it. I'm just trying to get my wash fairly even. And the same kind of deal, you know, think about, do you like that kind of wet and wet where you're kind of dropping some different colors together and letting that interact? You could certainly, you know, do it one color and let it dry so you've got some crisp edges. Got a little bit more kind of orangey brown than a green, but that's okay. I like it for my initial color. Again, I'm just avoiding this tree, painting around it. Not doing the best job in the world, not being the most careful. And, you know, I have a little salt, so I'm just gonna drop maybe just a little bit of salt in here, just for some fun texture. Again, the salt will only work if the paint's really wet. Otherwise, it just kind of sits there. But that's just kind of, I like some salt for some texture. And then as I kind of pull it back here, I can start to cool this a little bit. So I'm bringing in some green. And of course, as always, like play with the colors in any way that you want. The kind of perspective stuff we talked about is just kind of like those general rules and things to think about, but you can do anything. Because you can make fantasy or surreal landscapes. It's you know, to me, the important part of this lesson in class is this process, kind of the order we're going in. That's what really comes into play. So just because I showed you some about the colors, don't feel like you have to do it that way if you're feeling like you want to change it up. I think I'm going to kind of go maybe some purpley blue mountains. I don't want to go the same blue as my sky totally, but as they start to fade back, they'll appear a little bit more blue. So I'm going to, let's see, got a violet, and then I want to bring a little bit of blue. Maybe start with that. Yeah, that looks nice. And I can fill that in. And, you know, just watch your edges, of course. If both edges are wet, remember they'll meet and they'll blend together. So you just want to be cautious of that. It's okay to wait and let things dry. Take a break from it if you need to. There we go. And of course, as they go back, I'm just going to make them a little bit more blue. So they're starting to take on the effect of the atmosphere. And again, the masking looks kind of funny right now, but I think it's nice when you get to pop it off and see the white. Blue. So again, it's a little bit lighter as we go back, less contrast. Lighten that just a little bit with my paper towel. Again, paper towel is a good way to lift if you put too much color on something, just tap some paper towel on it. All right. Let's see, I'm gonna grab one of my black watercolor pencils just to kind of show you a couple things too. And you can certainly also use like little skinny brushes for details. So now I'm going to peel off this washi tape. Just kind of check it out. And then if I need to, which it looks like I do, just kind of clean up any edges kind of missed that spot. And let's see, a little down here at the bottom. All right, cool. Ooh, pardon me. So now we get to start thinking about kind of details and the fun kind of things that we want to do to emphasize this. So I'm going to like remove the masking for my clouds. A little. Here we go. It's not wanting to pop off. So you can wait to remove your masking, but my thought is I want to bring a little bit of shading and shadow into my white that I blacked out. So I'm getting rid of it now. And you just want to be a little careful to just, you don't want to smudge it too much because watercolor can smudge or you can get color where you don't want it on accident. So you just always want to be a little careful. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe I didn't shake the bottle enough. It's not coming off as nice as it normally does. Smudgy, that's okay. All right, there we go. Yeah, that masking, I've never had masking fluid that didn't want to just pop right off. That's funny. Okay, so now, like I'm saying, details. Like we want to create some more depth here because right now there's not a lot of depth happening. It looks relatively flat. So how can we start to increase depth and add things to it? So thinking about, like, for example, the close versus far up kind of law. Maybe you're wanting to add, you know, like grass or some kind of texture. Texture could be a way to do that. So I'm just gonna grab this little palette here. I like some of these colors. Let's see. And I'll just kind of show you some different examples of some things you could try. I'm just mixing kind of some yellow ochre, some green. I've got this little brush here. So maybe I'm going to start thinking about kind of adding, some line, and I can layer this, and you can kind of play around with your water a little bit. And then these ones up close will be, kind of in more detail. And then as we go back, they can, for example, maybe I take my brush with more water and I can almost kind of tap these colors into each other to almost kind of create like a more blurred effect. So a more wet on wet versus wet paint on already dry paint is going to help kind of push that. And then I just think about layering different values is going to help create depth. So thinking about lights and darks together. And then, like I said, we can kind of start to create this illusion of space. And the detailing and kind of how much you want to add is really up to you. So just, for time is true. It's, as most things we do, it's rare I would finish one in an hour, if I'm kind of adding time because I need to let things dry. But I just want to show you a couple other little things you can do because really now it's just working it and adding details. So like watercolor pencil, or you could even use a little paintbrush. So I'll kind of show you both. So, thinking about like, I'm gonna imagine like this little aspen tree because I did these little trees on my daughter's wall, her nursery. And I kind of, they're a white color. And then I would kind of add, these little kind of eyes or kind of different like lines to kind of push this idea of a birch tree. So sometimes doing the watercolor pencil can be kind of nice for that. And then I do take a little paintbrush with a little water, and then I can kind of use that to kind of blend some of this and turn it into the paint. And I can shade with it. You can layer. So the watercolor pencils are really fun for detailing, but just to show you too, like here's just, that's blue. I want some black. So I could also take just some black paint and a little paintbrush and also, so here's a variation in case you don't have watercolor pencils. And I like to play around with adding more water versus less water. Again, because that way you're creating depth. Because not everything is always just one tone. And it's just gonna kind of help push, your idea or whatever you're trying to do. But it's just, I think it's fun to play with the watercolor. I really love like the little brushes, the layering. So after you get these base washes, you can just, have fun and think about all these little details. And, I think we've talked about this in class, just kind of how, like, how do we know when we're done with something? And I think, this will just kind of speak to you a little bit, and you'll kind of think, okay, yeah, that looks like enough detail or enough texture, and now you'll feel good about it. You know, even like the mountains in the back here, I can kind of add some, you know, some different kind of texture, intensify some of this color. So of course, mountains, you know, all the different planes and edges on them. You know, mine are definitely stylized, but I can still, even with things that are stylized, we see those suggestions of reality, those shadows. You know, I was even talking about like cartoons with some of my students today about how we still see perspective in a cartoon when we're seeing inside a house shot or something like that. So I think learning how to create depth in your art is good no matter what style you're working in. Kind of bringing some pops of color in. That would look a little funky. It's kind of fun. Probably made that too bright in the back, actually. Just a little too bright. Blend this out. And too, sometimes I like to blend up it, like if I leave something kind of snow-capped, I might like to blend upward into that a little bit, just to create some interest. You know, I've even done things too. I can just show you, let's see if this is dry enough. So sometimes if I'm like, oh, there's something else, I mean, you can paint things into with watercolor. Like, let's say I wanted to do some little like pine trees or little evergreens. You know, I'm just taking like a little brush and some green paint, and just kind of very loosely kind of painting a little tree in here. You know, and then I think after that kind of dries, I'll tap in some lighter greens and some darker greens just to kind of pull out some depth there and to build up layers. So it doesn't happen in just one. But you know, sometimes adding things after the fact. There could be another one maybe back here. Yeah, just think about like all those little details. But you know, any kind of landscape you want to paint, the process is really similar, which again was the point of tonight's class, was to just kind of talk about how we kind of start with our sketch, we plan what is going to be white, we start with our background, then you know, kind of our middle grounds and foregrounds, and add washes. And then we start to build up our layers and create depth, add texture, kind of those finishing touches when you start using like the little paintbrushes instead of the bigger paintbrushes. And then too, like these trees, as I'm going back in space too, I can even start to like add some blue into them a little bit. So they start to appear like they're going to take on the effect of the atmosphere. They're darker going back in space. So I can start to create depth that way as well. Kind of start layering them. Well, kind of feel the trees. But again, you know, truthfully, I could spend like another hour just working on this and just popping up details and, you know, adding little things to it until I felt like,